I like to read the English Standard Version of 1 Corinthians 13, and what it says, a little passage, it defines it as the way of love, which is the same thing as Nicholas's book, The Way of Dying. The way of dying is love. It's actually forcing us dying, physical and the ego dying, forces us into love, okay? That's actually the experience of dying, is finding more and more love. Upon death, guess what? A lot more love. Now, granted, there's a lot more to work with as well, but this process here that we're going through is of dying and it's of love. So we're going to go through the love litmus test, which is to say, all right, how does this great book, this Bible, describe what love is? Let's just see how behavioral it is, by the way. You know, how many rules get put in here that are physical, like love is going to church at 11 o'clock on Sunday and giving X amount of dollars. Let's see if that's love, okay? We're going to go through what love is according to Corinthians. All right, first of all, if I speak in the tongues of men and angels but have not love, I am a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. Okay? That's a whole lot of people who are talking the talk, really, and not walking the walk. A noisy gong and a clanging cymbal, it's, tinny. It's not a sound we like. It's sort of annoying. And that's what happens when people talk a good game and they're talking about spirit, right? It's really what Jesus calls hypocrites because they're not being love. The description of love, which is coming up, oh, it's great. You go to church on Sunday, okay? Great. You give money in the little basket. That didn't get you into heaven. To be love is what gets you into heaven. To be love is to know who you really are, okay? That's awakening. That's born again, okay? But to just say Jesus is my Savior isn't enough. And he says it. Those who say, Jesus, please save me, get away from me, he says, you hypocrites. The fact is you have to be love. And if you're talking about this stuff and you're not love, and you're going to church and you're telling people you're a Christian and all that, not only does he call it hypocrite, so does Krishna, it's a hypocrite, but it is a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. People don't want to hear that, right? Because it sounds obnoxious. It's not effective either, okay? So love must be present in what we're talking about. You should be able to feel it too. It should be an exchange of energy that's felt. And if someone's open to it, they should feel it. It's a receptive love, okay? Giving and receiving. And that's with that first line. Now, what are the various aspects of love? It starts with, and this is super important for many different reasons, the very first definition of love in Corinthians is patience. Okay, I love it. Love is patience. How good are we at that? It's a good way to assess yourself. How patient are you? I've said many times this has been one of my biggest failings, especially the more I get into this stuff, the more eager I am for other people to do it with me. This is so much fun, forgiving, and sometimes I feel very stressful and sometimes a little judgmental because I find myself not being patient with others. And you know what that means? It means I got a lot more work to do, okay? It's a litmus test. If I'm not being patient, I'm off base, period. Don't worry about a speck in your neighbor's eye when you have a log in your own, okay? So patience, practice on very low things. How calm are you in traffic, right? Are you able to pull into traffic or find yourself in a long line at Walmart or maybe on Black Friday or whatever at Best Buy? Are you able to find yourself being at peace with all the chaos going around you and all the horns beeping and people yelling? Can you do that? Can you be patient in your relationships when other people are suffering and struggling and maybe not as woke as you are? And again, capital W woke, not small W American woke. Real woke is to recognize that not everybody develops at the same rate. Some of us, and sometimes I fear it's me, have been here 27 times before and others have been here 3 times, okay? That's sort of like looking at a 3rd grader and say, hurry up and be a senior in high school. You can't do that. Or yell at a plant, hurry up and grow. That's not going to work. It's not effective. Patience is a virtue. If you think of a God in the sky waiting for us to develop, boy, he's been waiting a long time, right? There's an infinite patience that comes from this source called love. Are we applying that in our lives? It's a very good way to look at it. How patient are we, okay? Assess yourself. Practice it. I like to tell people, if you want to see how good you are, see if you can go to a Walmart or Giant Eagle or a grocery store or wherever you are and pick the worst parking spot and then walk into the store and pick the worst line, the longest line. Wait at the end of it. Practice your patience, okay? And ask all the time, wherever you're at, to be served last. Can you practice being patient? It's just stay mindful with it, okay? The better you get at it, of course it feels good. Who likes their impatience? The more we practice love, the more we feel patience and vice versa, okay? First definition, how patient are we? And we must be patient with our process. It doesn't do any good to beat ourselves up for the mistakes we make. Be patient with yourself too. extremely important. Got to love yourself in order to love others. All right, what else is love? Love is kind. It's not arrogant or rude. Now, some of that is really obvious. I like to emphasize, though, with the word kind, something Wayne Dyer used to say. When given the choice between being right and being kind, always choose kind. How good are we at that in this country, especially politically and with religion? People are so insistent on forcing their right perspective on other people. This is how it should be. Well, if you're spiritual, no, you should choose kind. It doesn't even mention right in here. That's why I quote Rumi all the time when he says, beyond right doing and wrongdoing, there's a field, I'll meet you there. Okay? We want to rejoice in being kind now, and the right doing that we want to be is virtue. It's actually practicing patience and love and understanding and compassion with each other. That's what we should do, not demanding who's right or wrong about any particular political issue, or about whose sports team is correct, or even if in a relationship, if you're in an argument about who's right or wrong in that relationship. Far better to be kind. Now, I like to think arrogant and rude is obvious. Don't be those things. Okay, very clear. Unfortunately, it's easy to see that we have a lot of people with power who end up becoming very arrogant and rude. Don't judge them. Hating on them won't help, okay? Loving them doesn't mean voting for them. But you can recognize someone who's arrogant isn't love-based. You can recognize that. Notice it. But don't respond with hate, okay? Respond with love, including being patient with them. And enduring, which is coming up next. To be loved, to influence people, can only be influence people through love, which is, again, what Nicholas said. The only answer is love, okay? Love does not insist on its own way. Think about that. Such an easy litmus test. How often do we get into arguments which we don't like, and we think the reason why I feel bad in this argument because the other person won't agree with me. If I could just convince them to look at things my way, I would feel better right now. And that's most of what we do most of the time, especially with arguments and political dynamics and all the issues that we debate. Guess what? You'll only feel better if you practice not insisting on your own way. It's okay. Let it be, right? Just be at peace. Agree to disagree. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the way to do it. It's the very clear scripture telling us specifically what we need to do so that we can experience what God is and what God intends for us. Is to be that kind of love. You don't need to insist on your own way. Again, practice this. You can do this by offering your place in line to someone else, okay? Or being giving of something that's really important to you. Go ahead and practice giving something that you cherish away to somebody else, right? If we practice it, we'll get better at it. Don't insist on your own way. Practice this by turning on the opposing political party's channel, whatever it might be for you, and see if you can practice not getting your blood pressure up. Again, you don't have to agree, but you don't have to insist on your own way either. That's if you want to be loved. Love hopes all things, endures all things. That's super clear. I've often said to people who ask, what's the purpose of life? And I'm like, in my experience, this entire existence that we have is all about endurance. If you can just make it through, you will gain something just from the experience. Now, ultimately, the process is learning how to get rid of this and get to that, okay? The recognition and liberation are simultaneous from the Book of the Dead is this: to be aware that this light that's calling you home is you, okay? To be aware that there's a ground of all being or a heaven or nirvana or whatever that is your home because it is you. And to recognize that this isn't you and it is. That's the ultimate point of being. And to have an experience while we're here, like a movie. Movies are interesting. Games are interesting. Well, we're in a movie and a game. And it's interesting for the soul and for spirit. It's also a growth process. Acorns become oak trees, and physical beings have a little seed planted in them, and it becomes spirit, it becomes love. That's everybody, okay? And that's the point of being here. Well, this process, which is long and arduous, is often an endurance test. You almost can't learn if you stay here long enough. And if you just endure, that's sufficient. Well, guess what? Love hopes all things and endures all things. Endure, I just talked about. Well, hope, it's believing in everyone else too. Your process and theirs, right? It's recognizing that we all got this. We're a team. And I can be hopeful about that. Once you know this stuff is true, like capital T, deep in your soul truth, everybody's doing this. And now it becomes easy to encounter an arrogant or a rude person, and you're like, it's where they're at. I'm going to be patient with them because it's where they're at. Go ahead, be arrogant and rude. You could say that to them, namaste. And then they're going to go on their merry way, and eventually they're going to give up their arrogance and their rudeness. That process is known as dying. If they don't give up their arrogance and rudeness, they're never going to connect to love. Guess what? They get to come back for another trip around the sun. That's samsara, right? We're stuck in this wheel, so to speak, until we liberate ourselves by recognizing that we are love. Again, that's what that is. Recognition that you are love immediately liberates you from the flesh self. And the ego's gone. It dissolves immediately. Okay? So we must be hopeful and we must be enduring. When the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. Now, this is super fun. I could do an hour on it. This is the partial because it's the illusion. The physical self is not the complete self. This is the temporary self. It's the label self. The perfect, ultimately, that comes is when you integrate the love into the partial self. And now that's the perfect, and then no longer are you partial. We're all incomplete beings on this side of things. Nicholas called himself an imperfect vessel. Well, the imperfect vessel can only be completed by adding the spirit to it, or the light, or the Tao. And now it's a perfect vessel. Verse 29 of the Tao says we are vessels of perfection. Well, this thing sure as heck isn't perfect. As my, hairline and my abs will show, I can't be physically perfect. Nobody can. But can this imperfect vessel carry the perfect spirit around? Absolutely right. That's what it is. The perfect comes because we take the spirit into us, and the imperfect passes away. Now you know you're not this. Very clear, isn't it? When I was a child, I reasoned like a child, and when I became a man, I gave up my childish ways. I think that's hilarious, okay? Because it's talking about something we can completely understand. Little kids believe in Santa Claus, and they focus on it, write letters to it, pray for gifts to come, and they often do because we're playing the game with them. But they grow up and then they stop thinking that way. They give up their childish ways. When we are immature in spirit, we think of God, we think of Jesus wrong, to be honest with you. We often think if I pray to Jesus, he'll be like Santa Claus and he'll give us stuff, right? He'll make my cancer go away or give me my physical vision back. Right? I'm fond of saying, I've got an awesome uncle who's been hearing impaired most of his life. And he's a very good Christian, but God didn't restore his hearing. He's a wonderful man, but you know what? It's not about that. He's got spiritual hearing and spiritual sight. That's the stuff that Christ did, okay? He gives us our vision and our hearing back so we can see things through our third eye. So the childish ways is this idea that God is somehow going to regrow my hair if I pray for it, or give me a big bag of gold, or take away cancer, or take away deafness or blindness or anything like that. And most teachings in Scripture almost always look at that literally. We've talked about that a lot. Go back and look at the video from a couple weeks ago on what the dangers of reading the Bible literally. Restoring sight to the blind is a specific metaphor and parable for giving us vision through our third eye again. Seeing spiritually, seeing yourself as love instead of flesh. Well, there's no doubt maybe he restored sight to the physical blind. That's fine, but it's also not the point of the story. Because there's a whole lot of blind and deaf people out there who didn't get their senses back, and that doesn't make them bad Christians. But there's a whole lot of blind and deaf people who can see and hear spirit, right? That's the key to that. When I'm a man, I gave up those childish ways. When I'm a man and I get into this land of love, I give up these childish ways. We're honestly, in so many ways, like toddlers. And we're focusing on little things like gaining materials and possessions and winning games and making myself superior to. It's just ego stuff. Okay? Let's give up those childish ways. All of these are referring here. For now, we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. In the future, soon, I'm going to do a whole group on the mirror alone. It's that powerful. That's why I wrote in New Eyes. Or taking Nicholas's lead, the universe wrote through me. Just like all of us, whatever you've done, the universe is working through you to do it. In the mirror is a great spiritual psychological concept. Other people are always reflecting you back to you to show you what it is you need to be working on. And if you look in the mirror and you like your hair, then you're just going to leave because you like where it's at. But if your hair is messy, you're going to fix your hair, right? If you see traffic or a long line at Walmart, right, or something that's stressing you out, it's not its fault. It's reflecting back to you that you haven't practiced patience yet, that you're not in the land of love, okay? We see in a mirror dimly means we don't know this about the world. We don't realize the world is reflecting us back to us. It's a dim mirror. That's why they use the word dim. We can't see clearly. We don't recognize that the world's a mirror. And yet, in chapter 14 of New Eyes, I give a zillion examples of how all the different religions referencing the world as a mirror. How many of us live that out on a day-by-day basis, you know? I had to apply my hatred to Tom Brady for about 15 years before I realized he was teaching me something, and he didn't even know it. Tom, unless you're out there, hi Tom. But he taught me something. How about stop being jealous of people? Okay? Jealousy is not love, right? Mudita, being happy for someone else's love. That makes sense, doesn't it? Well, Tom Brady taught me that, unbeknownst to him. All characters in your life are teaching you what you need to learn, whether you know it or not. We see in the mirror dimly, but then face to face. Here's why. We're not these physical beings. But after a while, once you realize you're a love being, and you can see that clearly, and you see other people as love beings, that's face to face. Now it's like, oh, I get it. You're temporary physical. I'm temporary physical. That's Buddha's Four Noble Truths again, or the second to last thing that he said. All composite things are temporary. Our bodies are made up of pieces. It's temporary. It's not the true self. Once you know that about yourself and then you see others like that, now you're seeing face to face. But before that, it's a mirror, right? You are always reflecting back to me that which I need to see to further my growth, all right? Or to demonstrate my mastery of something. Jesus' experience on a cross demonstrated his mastery of love. He's on the cross being tortured and murdered, and he loved people. He forgave them for their ignorance. I mean, talk about high-end teaching. It's also where karma fits in. We're getting what we need, and just because it's bad doesn't mean you're bad. That's important. A lot of people have been victimized in the flesh, and yet they learn high-level spiritual teachings in the process, okay? So we can't say bad equals they did something bad. That's not how karma works, okay? We all get very high-level spiritual teachings in our lives when we need them, okay? You can trust the universe on that. And then last, this is the stuff you hear at weddings all the time. Faith, hope, love abide, but the greatest of these is love. Now, we hear that a lot if you go to weddings. Yeah, love sounds great. And then we forget the rest of this, and we don't pay attention to it. Even at weddings, I found myself being impatient. When are they going to serve the food, right? I thought the greatest is love. Well, love is patient. Just wait until the food shows up. Stop complaining about things, right? Don't be irritable at weddings, right? Don't be impatient. Don't be judging other people, right? Don't be resentful because the bride has a better looking dress than yours or whatever, okay? Love is the greatest of all virtues. Now, these other things are important, hope and faith and, a bunch of other virtues. But love is high end. Why? Because God is love. Now, to me, this is an extremely clear pathway, and we can manifest all these things through a variety of behaviors, okay? We often judge each other, and we assume we know what someone's doing based upon a certain behavior. We'll do that later when we do the mirror group as well. You can't assume that you know what the other person is doing based upon what the intention is based upon what they're physically doing, okay? But for you, it's a litmus test. Assess yourself. Buddha's last words, strive for your own liberation with diligence, means check yourself on a daily basis whether or not you're being loved. You can tell based upon the way you feel if you're not doing these things, it's not going to feel very good.